Hi, everyone. This is Gail. Welcome tonight to Overcoming the Obstacles. This is our Sunday night Bible study. And I am joined tonight by Stellar Piper, and she and I are going to work through the study. And just for reference, I am a former pastor, and Stellar Piper here is a seminary graduate. So we're going to try to plow through this study, but this is a discussion. So I want you to put your comments over here in the chat box. I also want to say hi to Tanya Lambert, who is already in here. So hi, Tanya. Welcome tonight.
Hi, Tanya.
We're doing these at 8 p.m. on Sunday nights. Did I just say 9 p.m.? If I did not mean to.
I think you said 8.
Did I say 8? Okay. It is 8 p.m. Now, for those of you who want to follow along with the study, I'm going to put the link down below. And this is what we're using. We started off kind of going with Bad Girls of the Bible, and she's kind of been our inspiration. This is from Liz Curtis Higgs, and she's been an inspiration for this. But we have kind of stepped aside from that and are kind of using it as a guide for some of the prophets. But like I said, we have stepped away from that, and we're going to be looking at some other ladies of the Bible as we go through this, because I don't think that women's stories are sung as loudly as maybe they could be. So we're hoping to be able to shed some light on some of the women of the Bible and some that you may not know about. And in this case, we are talking about Michal, and I looked that up, and it's pronounced Michal. And we're going to be talking about her. But first, I kind of want to know, this woman is the first wife of David in the Bible. And I kind of want to know, have you known before that David had more than one wife that was featured in the Bible? Let me know over here in the comments. I also want to say hi to Women's Station Channel. She has taken the time to come in tonight, and we appreciate that, Women's Station Channel. So the link to the Bible study is down below. It's a Google Drive link. And so to start off, Michal was the daughter of King Saul and the first wife of David. And we've got some scripture records that we're going to be looking at. And one of the things that I kind of want us to be thinking about. You just got what?
I just dropped a link to one of the passages in the chat box.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Hi, Granny Monster. Welcome. It's good to see Granny tonight. So one of the things about Michal that I kind of want you to think about is, where was her voice in all of this? Because she really didn't have any say in much of her life. So I kind of want you to be thinking about that as we go through it. Is what could she have done that might have been able to change and made her life better? So, all right. So, Stellar, do you want to go ahead and read this section here?
Yes, I am in 1 Samuel 18.
Yep.
Starting in 17, right?
Yeah, 17 to 28.
Okay, I'm reading from the Common English Bible, which is the version I dropped the link to in the box.
Okay. I've got the NIV, so we may switch off now and then. So if you just want to read a little bit of this, because we're going back. King Saul has David under him, and there's some rumors that David is basically a little mightier than King Saul, who really doesn't like that. So he is trying to ally David a little more firmly with his family. And that's where Stellar Piper is going to pick up.
Yep, pick it up in 17.
Okay.
Saul said to David, "Look, here is my oldest daughter, Merab. I will give her to you in marriage on this condition. You must be my warrior and fight the Lord's battles." "I won't raise my hand against him," Saul thought. Let the Philistines do that. I'm not worthy, David replied to Saul, and neither is my family or my father's clan in Israel to become the king's son in law. And so, when the time came for Saul's daughter Merab to be married to David, she was given to Adriel from Meholah instead.
Okay,
Now,
so hold
Saul's
on just a
daughter.
second. Just 1 second there. So we already see that he is not paying any attention to his older daughter's wishes, and he's trying to marry her off to ally David because everything right now is about King Saul. So go ahead. It's 20.
Now Saul's younger daughter Michal loved David. When this was reported to Saul, he was happy about it. I'll give her to him, Saul thought. She'll cause him problems, and the Philistines will be against him. So Saul said to David a second time, "Become my son-in-law now." Saul instructed his servants, "Tell David in private, look, the king likes you, and all his servants love you. You should become the king's son-in-law." Saul's servants whispered these things in David's ear, but David said, "Do you think it's a simple matter to become the king's son-in-law? I don't. I'm poor and insignificant." Saul's servants reported what David said, and Saul replied, "Tell David this. The king doesn't want any bridal gift, just 100 Philistine foreskins as vengeance on the king's enemies." Saul was hoping that David would die at the hands of the Philistines. When the servants reported this to David, he was happy to become the king's son-in-law. Even before the allotted time had expired, David got up and went with his soldiers and killed 100 Philistines. David brought their foreskins and counted them out for the king so he could become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave his daughter Michal to him in marriage. When Saul knew for certain that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved him, then Saul was even more afraid of David. Saul was David's enemy for the rest of his life. And whenever the Philistine commanders came out for battle, David would have more success than the rest of Saul's officers, so his fame spread widely.
Wow, and of course they were always at war with the Philistines. But can you imagine, having so little regard for human life that instead of paying a bride price, which was very common, it's a dowry that David would normally have had to have paid. So instead of coughing up big bucks, he would rather go out and kill 100 people and bring in the foreskins. It's so little regard for human life there. And what are you thinking, Stellar?
Yeah, I agree with you. There is very little regard for human life that Saul shows in this passage and in going on through chapters 19 and 20. I find it interesting in the Common English Bible that Saul says that his daughter will cause David problems and he'll have the Philistines on top of that. So that really doesn't speak well for what Saul thinks of his daughter.
That is true. And his oldest daughter, I feel bad for her because, he didn't care anything about her. He was just willing to sell her off. But here's the older daughter, and she has to know. I mean, sisters talk. At least you and your sister talk. And when one of you would have a boyfriend, the other one of you knew it before I ever did. So I just feel like the older sister probably knew that the younger sister was in love with David. And Women's Station Channel is agreeing. She says that's horrific. And I agree. Of course, now these are very violent times, but still, he's like, "Oh, okay, well, you just want me to go out and kill 100 people? No big deal. I'll be glad to do that for you." So there's no disregard for life, and there's no disregard for either one of the ladies. And I kind of wonder if that factored into their acceptance level. So looking at the Bible study questions, first question, what was Michal's initial reaction to David? She loved him, right?
She loved him. Yeah.
So, so she fell in love with him. What did Saul want David to marry? Why did Saul want David to marry Michal?
Well, ultimately, Saul wanted David dead,
Yeah, and
and he
I
wanted
think
to cause him as many problems as possible.
and I think he was thinking about maybe allying him with the family, kind of a, keep your friends close and your enemies closer kind of thing.
Could be.
Because if he, to me, if David didn't fall at the hands of the Philistines, he wanted to be able to keep an eye on him. I just kind of felt like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Okay. And so now let's go on a little bit and talk about um, First Samuel 18, 29, and 30 is what the next one goes into. Um, and it asks, why was Saul jealous of David?
That's actually made clear in, this isn't part of our reading for tonight, but that's made pretty clear earlier in chapter 18. David had come back from war and um, had killed however many people, and the people were happy. So they wrote a song about David and Saul, saying that Saul has killed his thousands and David has tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands.
So from that point, Saul was just consumed with jealousy and hatred for David.
Gotcha. And it even says, in this passage, that Saul became more afraid of him when he realized that the Lord was with David. So there's a spiritual battle going on here too, not just physical.
Oh, for sure.
So let's go down, and I'll read if you want to. 1 Samuel 19, chapters 8 through 17. Okay. And I'm reading out of the NIV. So it's going to sound a little different than what Stellar Piper was reading, but that's okay. Stellar, if you want to go ahead and plot that link over in there, that would be great.
Yes. 19, 8 through 17, right?
Right. Well, actually, I'm going to back up just a little bit on that and go to chapter 4 because I think it informs the following chapters.
You mean verse 4?
And then we have, I'm sorry?
You mean 4. Verse 4?
Verse 4, I'm sorry, yes. Because Saul had a son named Jonathan who he liked David. He spoke well of him. And so he went to Saul and told him, let the king not do wrong to his servant David, for he has not wronged you. And what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistines. The Lord won a great victory for all of Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? And Saul listened to Jonathan and took his oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. And once more war broke out, and David went out and fought the Philistines. He struck them with such force that they fled before him. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand. While David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with a spear. But David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good on his escape. And Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, if you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. And then Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed, covering it with a garment, and put some goat's hair at the head. And was Saul's... I'm sorry? Oh, I thought you said something. No. Okay.
No, I'm good.
No. Okay. And then when Saul sent the men to capture David, Michal said, "He is ill." Then Saul sent the men back to see David and told them, "Bring him up to me in his bed, so that I may kill him." But when the men entered, there was the idol in his bed. At the head was some goat's hair. And Saul said to Michal, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped?" And Michal told him, "He said to me, 'Let me get away. Why should I kill you?'" And when David had fled and made his escape, he went to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel went to Naioth and stayed there. Word came to Saul, "David is in Naioth at Ramah." So he sent men to capture him. But when they saw a group of prophets prophesying with Samuel standing there as their leader, the Spirit of God came on Saul's men, and they also prophesied. So, yeah. So, going on into the second set of questions here. Why was Saul jealous of David? Well, we kind of already answered that. Then it says, how did Michal help David escape from Saul a second time? Well, I mean, she let him out the window.
I
And
mean,
go, what?
that girl's got guts, because not only did she let him out the window, but she lied to the king about it.
Yeah.
And that's a killing offense. She's been killed for
Right.
it.
At that time, especially. And we already saw, the disregard for life. And it's reminiscent, too. Do y'all remember Rahab? We talked about her a few weeks ago and how she let the spies down out of the window and then lied to the king. There's no loyalties to kings at this time, is there? The
Not
women are just
really.
like all over the place. But you've also you can't discount the fact that Michal loved David, and this is her husband. And her father has sent these soldiers to come and kill her husband. Now, this is at a time where she has no voice. She has already been sold to David. She has seen her sister sold off to another man. So she's fully reliant on David at this time because, these actions are not exactly saying, "Hey, honey, you can trust your dad." You know? So, but I can see where she would have a lot of desire to protect David and to keep him alive. What's your take on it, Stellar?
Yeah, I mean, without her and without Jonathan, Saul's son, David would be dead before chapter 20.
I agree. I agree. And then,
I also want to point out in the Common English Bible, the translation's just a little bit different and it's a
okay.
little bit more clear. She let David out the window, Saul comes in, "Why did you lie to me?" In the Common English Bible, she says, Michal said to Saul, "David told me, 'Help me get away or I'll kill you.'" I just feel like that's a little bit more clear than the way the NIV has it.
Well, but the NIV doesn't really say anything about David actually saying that to her.
Michal said that to Saul. David never said it.
Okay, you got me confused there, which is
My
easy to
bad.
do.
It's verse 17 if I'm reading it wrong.
Okay, no, you're good.
Okay.
Wow, but this is a terrible time to be a woman.
Yes, it absolutely is.
So she's in love, and she's protecting herself also, even as she protects David because of her dependence on David. Because certainly women didn't get to have jobs.
No, women
So
didn't have jobs, but she does have legitimate affection for David.
she
Otherwise,
does.
she could have easily told her father the truth and turned him in.
That's true. But to me, one of the most unforgivable things that happens to her is what's coming up in the next chapter. That's, I'm sorry, the next book, and that's Second Samuel, chapter 3, verses 12 to 16. Whoops, I just turned to chapter 9. So chapter 3, and this is really an interesting time period. Okay, I'm getting my numbers backwards here. It really helps you to find passages if you don't have dyscalculia like I do, because I just turned to a totally different thing. So, all right. So, Second Samuel, chapter 3, 12 to 16. Let's back up. I know the Bible study calls for chapter 12, but I think we need to back up just a little bit, because if we don't, 12 won't make a whole lot of sense. So let me go up to 6. Okay. What do you think, Stellar?
I think I'm gonna drop a link to all of chapter 3 here in just a second.
Okay. Oh, hey,
And
we've got Peter in. Hi, Peter Parker. We did last night's stream. It was on the other channel as scheduled. So it was there. And you're dropping the link to all of 3? Good.
yes, all of 3.
Okay, well, I'm going to start at 6. And it says, during the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. Now, Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, and
Sure.
Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" And Abner was very angry because of what had been said, so he answered, "Am I a dog's head on Judah's side? This very day I am loyal to the house of your father Saul and to his family and friends. I haven't handed you over to David, yet now you accuse me of an offense involving this woman. May God deal with Abner, be it ever so severely, if I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on oath, and transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and establish David's throne over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba." Ishbosheth did not dare say another word to Abner because he was afraid of him. Then Abner sent messages on his behalf to David to say, "Whose land is it? Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all of Israel over to you." "Good," said David. "I will make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, the daughter of Saul, when you come to see me." Then David sent his messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, demanding, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins." So Ishbosheth gave the orders and had her taken away from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. Her husband, however, went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Barim. And then Abner said to him, "Go back home." So he went back. So I just want to pause here for just a second before we go into 17. And see what has happened is her father sold her again, and he married her off to Paltiel, son of Laish, who truly did love her. So she went from a marriage that was loveless to one where she was loved. And the reason we know she was loved is because her husband followed them crying when she was taken back to David. But what I don't see is any indication of why David wanted her back, except he viewed her as his. For why Why would you take somebody away from somebody who loved her if it wasn't just a control thing? You know, clearly up
Well,
to this point, it didn't bother him too much that she had been married off to somebody else.
well, David had to flee for his life, so he may not have known she was married off to somebody else. Because all he says is, bring Saul's daughter to me.
That's true, but I think he would have known. I mean, word spreads then and now. So maybe
You may
not.
be right. You may
It
be right.
doesn't say that from scripture. You're right. Okay, so let me go on in here to 17. And it says, Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, for some time you have wanted to make David your king. So he's talking to the elders. Now do it. For the Lord promised David, by my servant David, I will rescue my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies. Abner also spoke to the Benjamites in person. Then he went to Hebron to tell David everything that Israel and the whole tribe of Benjamin wanted to do. When Abner, who had 20 men with him, came to David at Hebron, David prepared a feast for him and his men. Then Abner said to David, let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord the king, so that they may make a covenant with you, so that you may rule over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. So, yeah, what do you make of that? He's had the country laid at his feet through the work of Abner conferring with the elders. So this for Michal had to have been a pretty good moment.
Had to have.
Oh, okay, it's up there. Gotcha. And Women's Station Channel also said her ex was like that. I'm sorry. I hate that. Because it's that power and control has been happening since time immortal.
Yeah.
So, so one of the questions is, why did David want to marry Michal again? I really don't have a good answer for that.
Well,
Because
she had helped him, and she loved him, and I don't see why David would want to marry her again if he didn't have some sort of affection for her.
Or was it just power?
I mean, that's also a possibility.
So I don't see any indication from this that, like, he could have said, bring my wife to me, for I love her and miss her, or even bring her to me because I want to honor the lengths that she went to save my neck.
No, you're right. It very well could be a power thing.
Okay, here's the Bible I've got has got the Bible study with it, or some Bible study with it. This is a cultural Bible, so it gives me some of the culture. And here's what this says. Bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come. Okay, it says several ancient Near Eastern law codes stipulated what was to be done when a husband was either voluntarily or involuntarily absent from his wife. The Mesopotamian laws state that if a man is taken prisoner by an invading force and carried away to a foreign country, he may receive his wife back on return, even if she had been taken by another man. But if a man repudiates his city and his master and then flees, he shall have no right to reclaim his wife upon his return. The code of Hammurapi, Hammurapi, addresses the issue similarly, adding that a woman incurs no blame by entertaining the house of another man, but only if there are not sufficient provisions in her absent husband's house. if the husband has voluntarily deserted his city and his wife because she enters another's house, then upon his return, because he repudiated his city and fled, the wife of the deserter will not return to her husband. So, okay. So if he didn't get her back, this is interesting to me. Because the way I'm reading this, it he could reclaim her unless he couldn't provide for her. So reading this, it kind of makes me think that it would make him look bad, as though he couldn't provide for her if he didn't ask for her back. That's what it looks like to me. So that's got to factor in there somewhere too. Don't you think? Yeah, I think he kind of did too, except for just wanting her back for show. I'm getting that he's like emotionally not invested with his wife.
He had other wives as well.
He did. That would have been the culture too.
Yeah, top of chapter 3, it lists them.
And then okay. Let me go back up here. In 1 Samuel?
No, 2 Samuel 3.
So this really should have had a start at the... Okay. Here we go. Sons were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was the son of Ahinoam of Jezreel. Then he had the son of Abigail, and then the son of Maakah, Maakah, and then Haggith, and then Ithream were born to David in Hebron. So he had several wives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did.
So there was no real need to have Michal back and take her away from somebody who loved her if it wasn't for kind of using her to get back with Saul. Because there's some power play going on. Saul gave her to David. David went away. So the king took Michal and married her off to this other guy. And now David comes in and he's like, wait a minute, I want her back. So she's getting pulled in lots of different directions here. And there's no indication that she can say anything about this that will change the situation. She's really being used as a pawn in war.
Yeah, she really is, but I don't think that was uncommon for the time. And I'm looking for a commentary I have on the Old Testament, and I can't find it. So hopefully I'll have that for next week.
Okay. And it's also interesting, too, did you catch that David sent the messengers to Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and not to Jonathan, who had stuck up for him to Saul? I just think that's an interesting point. Because, before Jonathan went to Saul saying, really, David's not a bad guy. And yet, yeah, and then, but when it came to the second marriage to David, David didn't send messengers to Jonathan who had stuck up. He sent them to her other brother. So I just kind of, like me in my mind, I'm like, what was up with that?
Granny Monster has a good point about it being something like the face that launched 1,000 ships.
Could be something like that. Could well be. And yeah. Women's Station Channel says she can see the connection to now, and it makes sense now that we're not alone in this. I agree. I agree. I think it helps give when we go back and look at the women of the Bible, I think there's a lot that we can relate to now that is, it's sad that we're still going through some of this, but it's also reassuring. And I think that sometimes with these stories, we can take some insights from them and apply it to our lives to help us with what's going on, which whatever we happen to be dealing with at the time. So, how did Michal's second marriage to David affect her relationship with her brother? Is one of the questions. And I really don't think that it's necessarily explained. I don't think that covered that at all. I don't get anything about that. I can't imagine it would have helped it. But yeah, I don't get that. Do you, Stellar? Okay. So now we're going to move on to, we have lost her. She'll be back, I bet. So now we're going to go on to 2 Samuel, chapter 6, verses 16 to 23. I've got a text from somebody. Okay, it's Stellar. Bless her heart, she's having technical difficulties. So we'll bear with her for just a minute while we go on over to 2 Samuel chapter 6, and that's verses 16 to 23. But there again, we may back up just a little bit. Okay. Okay. So, aha, I hear a bonk. That bonking sound. Welcome back.
Sorry.
Okay, we're going over 2 Samuel 6, 16 to 23. So I will try not to cough. Okay. Are you there? You're flipping over there. Okay, gotcha. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, let me back up because we're still at war and they're following the ark. And as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord. When she saw that, she despised him in her heart. Then they brought the ark of the covenant and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. And after he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of the Israelites, both men and women, and all the people went to their homes. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls and his servants, as any vulgar fellow would." And David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord, who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house, when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. All right. So David has been granted. We've lost Stellar Piper again. Yeah. Um, so David has been granted a huge victory. We have him getting so excited that he is celebrating by dancing before the Lord. He goes in to bless his household, and there's Michal, and she's mad. She's not looking at any of this in the glory of God. She is ticked at him. So he said, okay, basically, you're mad, but these slaves, I think she's back. Okay. And he's basically like, okay, you're mad, but by these
I
slave
don't know
girls,
what's going on.
it's okay. You're back. That's what we're just glad. So David has danced naked, Stellar. Michal is not happy. He told her, you may be unhappy, but these slave girls, they're happy. They're going to hold me in honor. And, the slave girls would be part of the masses of his household that he was going to bless. And also, that's more voices than Michal. And he reminds Michal that it was before the Lord. Then he kind of throws it in her face, because he says, it was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house. And of course, she's from his house. And he is reminding her, hey, he didn't choose your dad. He chose me. He didn't choose anybody from your house. He chose me. And then the last part of it, and Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. So I thought that was pretty sad. But then I went back and I did some reading about some of the culture, and it indicates that the most likely reason that she didn't have children was because they were not together as man and wife in a physical sense anymore. So he would have, if this cultural reference is accurate, then he has basically abandoned her. He's still going to have to take care of her because that's the law. But if they never had relations anymore, then, and that's why she was childless, then he's abandoned her. And she still has no voice. Because whenever she's used it, she's basically had it thrown back at her. And let's see. Yep. I'm going up here. Let's see. Missed some comments. So I'm going back. Women's Station channel. Lori says, it's chilling, sad, and also a relief, like you said. You accept that you have no control and rest your mind. I think that's part of it. I think also sometimes we look for where we have control. Because for me, when I read the story of Michal, I'm thinking, okay, what would I have done differently? But that's looking at it through the lens of today, the more modern lens. And certainly, at least in the U.S. today, she would not have been sold. That's one thing she would have had would have been the right to choose who she married. And since it says that she loved David, she might have married him anyway. So, and then Granny Monster says, I think too, it can be said at some point, walking with faith is not about what we want, but where we're sent. Pretty sure that isn't one gender or the other. That's a huge point too, because I think so. Because we're told, in the New Testament,
Absolutely.
we walk by faith, not by sight. Go where you send me is a popular hymn that we sing in church. I think there's a lot to be said for that, and I don't think that's one gender on another either, because the Bible is filled with women who are called in various ways. And I think that their stories get buried under the stories given to us by patriarchal society. So hopefully, this study will help bring more women to light. For me, too, Michal was a pretty brave woman. I mean, she called her husband out for his behavior of him dancing. But knowing she's a wife married to somebody who is dancing, who's also the king, who also has many other wives, that doesn't, she doesn't have a lot of good firmness to stand on in that household. You know, it would be very easy for David to say, never mind, get out of here. I'm finished with you, you know, because I've got these other wives who I'm having children with and not you. And I'm chosen, not somebody of your lineage. And you've already been married to somebody else, and he cared about you, so go back to him. So she kind of didn't pay attention to that. She called him out anyway. You know, she lied to her dad, the other king, to protect David. So she's really a pretty gutsy gal. You know, uh, she's just not treated with respect. What do you get out of that, Stellar? Use that fancy education.
Sorry, I only
And let's
got like a third of that. What was the
okay,
question?
I was saying that really Michal was a pretty gutsy lady, but she didn't. That didn't matter in the end. Just in the way that she called out David and tried to shield him from the wrath of her father there. And let me go. Yeah, so the slave girls were legal back then. They most definitely were. And Granny's saying also in that culture, if she's not mistaken, he would have been legally under no obligation to add to her family. Very true. Very true. No legal obligation at all. But having children for women at that time was more than carrying or as much carrying on the lineage as the woman's retirement plan. If something had happened to David, then she would have been the responsibility of her children, especially if she happened to have male heirs. So leaving her childless could have been another huge problem in Michal's life. And we lost Stellar again, but she must be having internet issues. But yeah, I mean, Granny, you have really good points. But it's another way to say, Michal, I really don't care. I don't care enough about you to have children to provide that way for your future if something ever was to happen to David. Because the likelihood that something could have happened to David is actually pretty high because he kept going to war. And things happen in war, even if you have the Lord's favor upon you. So let me see. Well, yeah, we unfortunately, but that happens. But from a legal perspective, it's not sanctioned. At least today, it's not. Yeah, it's it's. My mind is not working tonight. I'm sorry, you all. But yeah, it's one of the songs that we sing a lot in church, and I think it's one of my favorites. It was the female retirement plan. Yeah, basically it was. It definitely was. I'm going to look up another scripture here right quick. And that little song is based on Hebrews 11:1. And it says, faith is being confident of receiving something you hope for and being sure of what is not evident in one's eye. To walk by faith not by sight. It's simply saying you believe in God's character and his promises. So that's one interpretation. There's also 2 Corinthians where it says we walk by faith, not by sight. So it's a very strong reminder. It kind of sums it up in a nutshell, how our faith is, that we use it. So yeah. And Women's Station Channel says we need a retirement plan now. We do. We do. And fortunately, we are more able to have actual retirement plans that don't rely on family that can be somewhat fickle, you know? So, yeah, it does. It does. So, I think for us as women, you know, we walk by faith. I'm going to kind of go off on a little tangent here. But I think as women, knowing that we walk by faith, not by sight, is what keeps us moving forward. Like if you're victims of abuse and you have some faith that tomorrow will be different, then that keeps you going, you know? Or it was helpful to me when I was a kid. Now, I've not been a victim of abuse other than the sexual assault, but not by my husband, obviously. But for me, that really helped when I was a kid growing up, because I was like, okay, tomorrow's going to be better. The Bible says he knows the plans that he has for me. He's working for the good in my life. It's got to be better. And I think that hope, that faith can keep us going. We might not be able to see a better tomorrow all the time, but one step in front of the other, even if that only lasts for like 30 seconds or a minute, and you're having to constantly remind yourself that it can be better. I think as long as we keep pushing forward, it will be. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it's good to have that assurance. And I think that's one of the things that we can take away from this is that, you know, she didn't have any assurance, but we do. And that can bring us some comfort. She didn't have assurance. If her husband didn't want to take care of it at all, she didn't eat. And we have assurance, relatively assurance, that there are places that we can go to get food if we need it. And we're not fully reliant on our families like they were back then. So that provides some assurance also. Stellar Piper is back with us. Hi again, Stellar Piper.
I have given up on my laptop and I'm
You're on your
you
phone.
from my phone.
Okay. Yeah, you're kind of like popcorn tonight. You kind of pop in and out.
Well, that's what my internet's been doing on my laptop. So
I felt like you were having internet issues. And let's see, Lori is saying so many women can't get near 30 years. I fought hard running from abuse. Sounds close to the culture still back then.
Yeah.
To get a very small amount, I would never be able to live on. Yeah, it's, but there are, I mean, there are some of the stories like Michal's that we can go back and look at and learn from and take assurance from. But today, fortunately, you know, there are folks that will help us if we're in a situation where there is abuse. We have to be able to see that the help is out there, but there are shelters. So if you're on the East Coast and you need to go to someplace in California, that can happen. Whereas in this time period,
that wasn't a thing.
It couldn't. And I'm not saying that going across the country would be easy. I'm just saying that thank God now there are enough women and enough people to stand up and say, we're not going to take this. We're not going to remain in this biblical time where we've pushed forward. And Stellar, Lori says you're clear.
Yay.
And Granny's saying it's like diet and exercise. We all know that if it can be great and life-changing for the better, but faith is great, but it takes so much training as either diet or exercise. And wholeheartedly, I think that's true.
Yeah, for sure.
And Lori's saying very hard when you're abused. I guess it depends on who did it to you. I think that's true too. You know, I think that's true. there's more to overcome. There's when you've got somebody who is, if it's not your first date or two and you've worked deep into a relationship, then it's harder to overcome, I think. Faith can help. And the thing is, faith gives us the courage and the strength. And I think these other women's stories, like even Michal, even though she didn't have a voice that she could use, we can still look and say, okay, she was pretty gutsy to be able to do what she did in the time that she did, to lie to a king and to call out another king. That's really a pretty big deal.
Yeah, she had guts for sure.
Her voice wasn't listened to. And I think sometimes that we feel like our voices aren't listened to, but that doesn't mean that we're not courageous, that we're not facing our situations with courage. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. I don't know about anybody else, but it makes sense to me.
Yep. She's saying, well, I think of the stature of the man as of BSK then too, is how much the abuse is accounted to. Good points there too. Real good points. So good stuff, you all. Thank you. Stellar, is there anything you want to say as we wrap up?
No, I think we've about covered everything.
Okay. You're going to be on here next week too, right?
And hopefully my internet will be better.
I hope so. And then, of course, next week is Palm Sunday. So, yay. And then after that, maybe, Stellar Piper, you and I can do it live and in person, and we won't have to worry about it from one internet. So that'll be Easter. So, okay, Stellar, Granny says, and here we are with every op to sound off and still learn from her. Yeah, I agree.
For sure.
I mean, to me, you don't hear that much about her because she's so glossed over. But I take a lot of comfort from her courage. And that to me is the giant takeaway of her life and kind of why we're looking at her. Because she has, when you talk about the whole of the Bible and the whole of King David's life, other than her being used as a pawn between Saul and David, she's kind of a bit player. And you really don't recognize fully, that she was even there. But yet, to me, there's a lot of comfort in the fact that even though she was a bit player, she still found some courage to speak out. So, yeah, that's my takeaway. What's yours, Stellar?
I think it's important to note that even though she was just a bit player, she was an important bit player. And without her, the whole course of Scripture would be different.
How so?
She saved David's life.
That is true. Okay.
And if David had died right then, the whole
it would have been a lot different.
Bible, that's the word I'm looking for, would be different.
Would be. David's not the nicest guy on the planet.
Oh, for sure not.
We're going to be hearing some more about him and the women in his life as we go through some of the studies.
Yeah, he was not really that nice of a dude.
No. Violent, difficult. Yeah.
Womanizer.
Yeah, we're going to get more into like what the women had to put up with him later. And Lori is saying, her life sounds so sad. It's hard for me to have faith there'll ever be a happy outcome. Well, it is sad in some respects, and certainly being childless is not ideal for her. David did have to keep her up for as long as he was alive, and fortunately he had a long life. But by setting her aside and kind of removing her son from the equation, she was safe because nobody's going to mess with the king's wife.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't done. and her basic physical needs of home, shelter, food, he had to take care of all of that as long as she was married to him. So she did have some assurance. It's just that if something had happened to David, she didn't have a good fallback. Yeah. Unless I guess she could have maybe gone back to maybe she could have gotten back to the husband that loved her. That might have been a possibility. But yeah. So it was hard. But and the other thing about setting her aside is, I guess the overall good thing is she didn't have to put up with King David much. So yeah,
I count that as a bonus in her spot.
Me too. She said it was beautiful. Hope things can time right for us in your streams again. Thank you very much for coming in, Granny. We'll be back here at 8 next week too. And Women's Station Channel says, I suppose that's good, Gail. She had her needs. That's where the small parts are happy. Yeah, I think with everything, we have to take our happiness where we can find it. And look at those bright spots when we can. And the bright spot for her would have been her physical needs would have been taken care of. So, yeah. So, all right, you all. Thank you so much for coming in. And we got that link down below. And we will see you all Sunday at 8 o'clock Eastern. So, Palm Sunday. We'll see you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Night. There we go.